My lords, my lady, that is only 1 point.
Yes, I think it's page 6806.
Thank you. I think it's in the standard form of wording you're probably familiar with from other jurisdictions.
I have noticed that they vary on
Well, the one we've been given
that's why I ask.
is the Judicial Appellate Jurisdiction Act, and it's section 14, the proviso to section 14.1.
Thank you.
Subject to the unfair trial point. There's no unfair trial. The proviso, I submit, does. The final question is that of remission. In my submission, this would hardly be a more serious case. It is of particular concern that we are talking here about great celebrities. That doesn't mean that you apply a different standard, but of course it does mean, in my respectful submission, such a high-profile case with, on the face of it, such overwhelming evidence. Most of it, of course, not the entirety of it, being of a technical nature and so forth. I submit this would be an appropriate case for the matter to be remitted for a retrial. My lords, I don't think on the whole you yourselves do that. You normally send it back to the Court of Appeal to consider. But I would submit there's every reason, if I'm wrong, for the Court of Appeal to consider what to do. Those are my submissions on the main point. I've only got a little bit of time on the other points. I think I'm right to say my lords, you have seen our written case.
Yeah, this is the jazz to it.
Poison that could realistically be discounted on the basis of a direction. Well, then a friend also said you can discount unconscious bias because of the strength of the evidence. The jurors will essentially have said that they didn't need to consider the corruption because the case was so strong. The fundamental problem we would submit with that, ignoring some practical problems I'll come to in a moment, is that what that is doing is inviting the court to speculate about the jury's thinking. It doesn't know how the jury approached the decision making. By definition, the jurors may not know what factors, every factor that influenced them. We are potentially talking here about unconscious bias, and that is obviously something that the jury won't necessarily be aware of. And it's particularly difficult for the court to understand effectively the impact of bias when it simply didn't sit through this long trial. And then a friend summarised the evidence, but just pick up a couple of points out of that, and the sort of fundamental point that's at the heart of this. He started by referring to Mr. Chow's evidence, but Mr. Chow's evidence was clearly rejected in part by the jury because Mr. Williams was acquitted. He then relied on the electronic exhibits, but there, as he accepts fairly, there were arguments about the integrity of those exhibits. That's a credibility issue. He finally says, the heart of the defence case was that various exhibits had been fabricated. That is a credibility issue. That's an issue that requires assessment of what the officers and others said in cross-examination. And we would submit it's impossible for this court, many years after the event, with transcripts but not much else essentially, to assess the extent to which the jury would inevitably have discounted, because of the strength of the evidence, prejudicial material. In any event, fundamentally, that explains why there is a right to trial by an independent jury, because it's for the jury to assess facts. What my learned friend's submissions do is potentially undermine that right, and that explains why all the authorities demonstrate essentially that the proviso doesn't apply. What my learned friend was seeking to do in my submission was seeking to apply the proviso, having accepted later in his submissions that the proviso can't apply to an unfair trial. Well, if it's a biased jury, you have an unfair trial. And that's entirely consistent with Serafin as well, because it clearly, if the jury was unlawful because it was biased or indeed didn't comply with the Jury Act, Seraphim paragraph 49 in our submission makes it clear the verdict can't be upheld.
The main focus on this trial